I don't care about your 15-year software license. You're redundant, the CEO yelled, tossing my termination letter. I nodded, logged out, and drove home. By Tuesday morning, the entire supply chain of a $3 billion retail client collapsed, and the CEO was begging on my doorstep. To understand how a massive multi-million-dollar corporate logistics network ground to a complete standstill over a single weekend, you have to look at how we built Apex Logistics Group from the ground up. In 2011, when our founder Richard Caldwell hired me, we were operating out of a tiny, drafty office near the port of Newark. We had exactly 12 freight trucks, a couple of lease warehouses with leaking roofs, and a mountain of disorganized paper manifests that constantly got lost in transit. Richard was a salesman by nature, a man who could charm any manufacturing plant into signing a shipping contract, but had absolutely no idea how to actually move the freight from point A to point B without losing half of it along the way. I was 37 years old back then, a systems architect who had spent a decade designing database schemas for transport networks. And I saw a massive opportunity. Richard told me he needed a dispatch system that could compete with the major international freight forwarders, but he had zero budget to buy enterprise software like SAP or Oracle. So, we struck a deal. I agreed to work for a modest salary and a promise of future equity on one very specific legal condition. I would build the entire logistics database, the custom customs clearing APIs, and the automated container dispatch routing system from scratch. However, the software would not belong to Apex Logistics Group. The intellectual property would remain sole property of my personal entity, Vance Logistics Solutions LLC. I granted Apex Logistics Group a software operating lease. The lease was simple, structured under a formal licensing agreement. Apex would pay Vance Logistics Solutions LLC exactly $1 per year for the right to use the software. The contract had a strict, non-negotiable clause. If my employment with Apex Logistics Group was ever terminated without cause, or if the company breached the terms of the IP agreement, the operating license would automatically expire at midnight on the day of termination, revoking all API access keys and data routing rights. Richard Caldwell, eager to get his trucks moving and desperate for a technical backbone, signs the agreement without a second thought. For 15 years, that software was the invisible engine of Apex Logistics Group. I spent my days and nights writing code, refining the port dispatch terminal routing, and integrating direct data links with the U.S. Port Authority and Customs and Border Protection systems. Our proprietary platform, which I named PortGate, could clear a shipping container through customs, assign a truck driver, calculate the optimal highway route based on live Department of Transportation traffic data, and update the client's inventory database in real time. Because of PortGate, our shipping efficiency skyrocketed. We grew from those 12 trucks to a massive fleet of 400 heavy-duty freight vehicles operating across 3 major ports. Our biggest client, Target Global Retailers, a massive supermarket and retail chain with $3 billion in annual revenue, trusted us with their entire East Coast distribution network. We were moving 4,500 shipping containers every single week. Every single container ran through PortGate. If PortGate went down for even an hour, trucks would pile up at the terminal gates, customs declarations would fail, and cargo would sit idle. The port authorities would immediately begin charging demurrage fees of $15,000 per container per day. I managed PortGate single-handedly. I knew every line of code, every API handshake, and every server cluster. While the company grew into a $180 million logistics powerhouse, my title remained Director of Supply Chain Logistics Systems. I was 52 years old now, content with my work, and proud of the system I had built. Richard Caldwell had become a wealthy man, and while he never quite gave me the equity he promised, he always treated me with respect and left me alone to run the systems. But 6 months ago, everything changed. Richard Caldwell announced he was stepping back from daily operations to prepare for his retirement and negotiate a potential merger in Tokyo. To run the day-to-day business, the board hired a new chief operating officer named Bradley Ward. Bradley was 45 years old, carried a glossy degree from a prestigious business school, and wore expensive Italian suits that looked entirely out of place in our grease-stained port offices. He was the classic corporate cost cutter, a man who saw employees not as human assets who kept the company running, but as red numbers on a spreadsheet that needed to be erased to boost his short-term profitability metrics. From the day he arrived, Bradley made it clear he didn't value my 15 years of service. He looked at my salary, which had grown to $150,000 a year, and saw a prime target for his budget cuts. He didn't understand the technical complexity of Portgate. To him, it was just a website that our dispatchers used to click buttons. He believed that any junior IT graduate could run it for a third of the cost. Within 3 months of taking the job, Bradley hired a new assistant manager for my department. His name was Liam Ward, a 28-year-old kid who also happened to be Bradley's nephew. Liam had a basic online certificate in IT support and spent most of his day looking confused in front of our server racks. But he was family, and Bradley was determined to fast-track him into my position. Bradley began instructing me to document every single one of my daily routines, write detailed step-by-step guides on how the customs API handshakes worked, and hand over the master administrator credentials for the server host. I saw the writing on the wall, but I remained calm. I complied with his requests, providing basic operational documentation, but I kept the master API private keys and the licensing verification servers under the control of Advanced Logistics Solutions, LLC. The conflict finally came to a head in late July. My daughter was turning 18, and my wife and I had planned a family weekend trip to celebrate. I had submitted a formal vacation request 3 months in advance, and Richard Caldwell had personally approved it before leaving for Tokyo. But on the Thursday before our trip, Bradley called me into his office. He looked up from his tablet, his face cold and indifferent. He told me that our shipping volume at the port of Newark was peaking, and he was canceling my vacation. I needed to work through the weekend to monitor the shipments. When I reminded him that the vacation had been approved months ago and that my family was already packed, he sneered. He told me that in the logistics industry, personal life comes second, and if I wasn't willing to show dedication, he would find someone else who would. I looked him straight in the eye, stood my ground, and told him I would be taking my pre-approved leave. That was the moment the trap was sprung. The air in the executive conference room on Friday morning was thick with tension. Bradley Ward had called an emergency department meeting at 9 o'clock sharp. All the senior dispatchers, warehouse managers, and IT staff were seated around the long mahogany table. At the head of the table sat Bradley, looking smugly at his tablet, while his nephew Liam sat next to him, wearing an oversized suit and trying to look important. I walked in and took my usual seat at the far end of the table. Before I could even open my notepad, Bradley tapped his gold pen against his glass cup to get everyone's attention. He didn't waste any time. He looked directly at me and said, in a voice loud enough for the entire room to hear, that some employees seemed to think they were irreplaceable. He stated that Apex Logistics Group was a fast-moving corporation, and we had no room for people who put their personal weekend plans above the operational stability of a $180 million shipping pipeline. I kept my face completely expressionless. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to humiliate me in front of my team, to force me into a defensive argument so he could cite insubordination as a cause for termination. The warehouse managers looked down at their laps, uncomfortable with the blatant hostility. Bradley continued, saying that since I had refused his direct order to cancel my weekend trip, I had shown a complete lack of commitment to the company's future. He announced to the room that my services were no longer required at Apex Logistics Group. He turned to Liam and said that effective immediately, Liam Ward would be taking over as the Director of Supply Chain Logistics Systems. He told the team that Liam represented the new, modern face of Apex's technology department, while my older, outdated methods were holding them back. He then reached into his folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the long table toward me. It was a formal termination notice. It stated that I was being terminated for insubordination and failure to perform my duties, effective immediately. By citing insubordination, Bradley was attempting to deny me my standard severance package and void any claims to company benefits. He smiled a thin, vicious smile, expecting me to shout, to plead, or to threaten him with a lawsuit. Instead, I pulled my reading glasses out of my pocket, placed them on, and carefully read through the termination document. I checked the date and the timestamps. It was signed by Bradley Ward as COO on Friday, July 24, 2026 at 9:15 a.m. Underneath his signature, the document clearly stated that my access to all company systems would be revoked by the end of the business day. I took off my glasses, folded them, and placed them back in my shirt pocket. I picked up my pen, signed my acknowledgement of receipt on the document, and slid it back across the table. "Understood," I said quietly. My voice was calm, steady, and entirely free of anger. Bradley blinked, clearly caught off guard by my lack of reaction. He cleared his throat and said that I had 2 hours to pack my personal belongings and leave the premises. He warned me that security would accompany me to my desk and escort me out of the building, and that any attempt to tamper with the company's servers or delete files would result in federal prosecution. I stood up from my chair and smoothed out my jacket. "There will be no need for security, Bradley. I will collect my personal items and depart. I wish you and Liam the best of luck with the Portgate system. It requires a lot of attention." As I walked out of the conference room, I could hear Liam chuckling and telling his uncle how easy the transition was going to be. I walked down the hall to my office, followed closely by a nervous junior HR representative who had been instructed to watch my every move. I spent the next 30 minutes packing my desk. I put my framed family photos, my favorite coffee mug, and a few physical reference manuals into a cardboard box. I did not touch the company-issued laptop. I did not open the command line. I did not delete a single file or modify a single line of code in the Portgate repository on the company's local servers. Doing so would have given them a legal reason to sue me for sabotage. I knew I didn't need to sabotage anything. The system was designed to protect itself. At 10 o'clock, I carried my box out to the parking lot and placed it in the trunk of my car. I got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and checked my watch. It was 10:15 a.m. on Friday. Under the terms of the software licensing agreement that Richard Caldwell had signed 15 years ago, the lease for the Portgate dispatch software would automatically terminate at midnight on the day of my termination. Because Bradley had officially fired me on Friday, July 24th, the license would expire at 12:10 a.m. on Saturday, July 25th. I drove home, feeling a strange sense of relief that I hadn't felt in months. My wife was waiting for me, surprised to see me back so early. I told her that my schedule had cleared up and that we could leave for our daughter's birthday weekend immediately. She asked if everything was all right at the office. I smiled, kissed her on the cheek, and said, "Everything is perfectly fine. The system is running exactly as it was programmed to do. Let's go celebrate." We loaded the car and hit the highway, heading out of the city. As we drove, I turned my cell phone to silent and placed it in the glove compartment. I had no intention of looking at it until Monday morning. I knew that by the time we returned, the corporate empire Bradley thought he had conquered would be in complete ruins. While my family and I were enjoying a quiet dinner at a lakeside cabin on Friday night, the digital gears of Vance Logistics Solutions LLC were spinning exactly as they had been programmed to do for the last 15 years. To understand the absolute control I held over the Portgate software, you have to understand the architecture of modern enterprise networks. Most corporate executives like Bradley Ward assume that once a software application is installed on their local office servers, it belongs to them forever. They do not understand the difference between hosting code and owning the legal right to run it. When I designed Portgate in 2011, I knew that corporate loyalty was a myth. I knew that founders retire, boards of directors change, and new managers arrive who will happily discard the people who built the company. To protect myself, I built a 2-part licensing architecture into the core code of Portgate. The first part was the local application database, which sat on the physical servers in the server room at the Apex Logistics headquarters. This handled the basic interface that our dispatchers use to input truck routes, driver schedules, and cargo manifests. The second part, however, was the external license validation engine. Every single night at exactly midnight, the local Portgate installation at Apex was programmed to execute an automated secure HTTPS handshake with an external authentication server. This server was hosted on a secure Amazon Web Services S3 bucket and EC2 instance that belonged entirely to Advanced Logistics Solutions LLC. I paid for this AWS hosting out of my own pocket, and the credentials were never stored on Apex property. The nightly handshake did two things. First, it verified that the software lease was active. Second, it pulled the active digital security certificates and API access tokens required to communicate with the federal systems of the U.S. Port Authority and the Customs and Border Protection Agency. Because we handled international shipping containers, every piece of cargo entering or leaving the ports had to be electronically cleared through these government databases. Without the active API tokens provided by my external server, Portgate was completely blind. It could not submit customs manifests, it could not receive port clearance codes, and it could not issue the digital gate passes that allowed our trucks to enter the container terminals. On Friday night, at exactly 12 a.m., the local Apex server initiated its standard nightly handshake. The request traveled across the internet to my Advanced Logistics Solutions server, but this time, the server's automated script checked the active licensing registry. The registry database had already updated itself. When Bradley signed my termination document at 9:15 a.m. on Friday, the company's automated HR system had marked my employee profile as inactive, terminated. Because my licensing contract stated that the software lease was tied directly to my employment, the Advanced Logistics Solutions server read the updated status. The script executed a pre-written protocol. First, it updated the lease status of Apex Logistics Group to Exert, license revoked. Second, it disabled the active API routing keys for the Newark, Philadelphia, and Baltimore port terminals. Third, it encrypted the outbound security tokens. When the Apex server completed the handshake, it did not receive the active certificates. Instead, it received a standardized error code. Error 403, software lease expired. Please contact Advanced Logistics Solutions LLC for licensing renewal. Within milliseconds, the main control dashboard of Portgate across all Apex terminals locked. The dispatch screens, which usually showed a live map of 400 trucks and thousands of container statuses, turned gray. A simple, bold message appeared on every monitor in our dispatch offices and warehouses. System access restricted, invalid license. But the real chaos didn't start at midnight. Saturday was a relatively light shipping day, mostly handling scheduled weekend warehousing moves and local freight transport. The senior dispatchers on duty noticed the system error, but they assumed it was a temporary server glitch. They tried calling the IT help desk, but the junior technicians had no idea what the error code meant. They left a high-priority ticket for Monday morning, believing they could just bypass the system manually for a few hours. However, you cannot manually bypass the U.S. Customs and Port Authority. By Saturday afternoon, 45 heavy-duty trucks arrived at the Port of Newark to pick up containers arriving from Europe. When our drivers reached the terminal gates and scanned their digital passes, the Port Authority scanners returned a red light. The Portgate API had failed to transmit the customs clearance codes to the port's central database. The security guards at the port gate refused to let the trucks enter. Our drivers, confused and frustrated, began calling the dispatch office. The dispatchers tried to log into the port's manual web portal to enter the container numbers, but the Port Authority's portal required an encrypted security token that was generated fresh every 12 hours by my external server. They couldn't get the tokens. Within hours, our trucks were parked on the side of the highway leading to the port, blockading the entrance lanes. The Port Authority police began issuing tickets for blocking traffic. By Saturday night, the demurrage fees began to accumulate. Under our contract with the Port of Newark, any shipping container that is cleared by the ship but not removed from the dock within 24 hours incurs a cargo storage penalty. The rate is $15,000 per container per day. On Saturday night, we had 200 containers sitting on the docks of Newark and another 80 in Philadelphia. The financial bleeding had officially begun, and there was absolutely nothing Liam Ward or Bradley Ward could do to stop it. They had the keys to the building, but I had the keys to the highway. By Monday morning at 8 o'clock, the situation at Apex Logistics Group had escalated from an operational glitch to a catastrophic business disaster. The port of Newark was in complete gridlock. More than 300 of our freight trucks were backed up along the access roads, unable to enter the terminals. The Port Authority had threatened to suspend Apex's overall carrier operating license if we did not clear our vehicles immediately. Meanwhile, our warehouse terminals were overflowing with outbound cargo that could not be processed because the customs dispatch manifest system was completely locked. Inside the Apex headquarters, the atmosphere was chaotic. Liam Ward had spent 36 hours straight in the server room, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and printouts of code. He had tried to bypass the licensing check by editing the local system files, but every time he modified the code, the software's built-in integrity check detected the tampering and locked the database completely, requiring a master encryption key to restore it. He had even tried to install a generic open-source trucking software, but it couldn't connect to the Port Authority's specialized customs API, which required my proprietary registered handshakes. Bradley Ward stood behind his nephew, shouting at him to fix the problem. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his face was pale. The reality of the situation was starting to set in. At 8:30 a.m., Bradley's desk phone rang. It was the vice president of global supply chain for Target Global Retailers. Target Global was our largest client, accounting for $45 million in annual contract revenue. Their entire East Coast distribution network was now completely frozen. 250 shipping containers filled with fresh produce, dairy, and seasonal goods were sitting on the docks under the summer sun, slowly rotting. The Target VP did not hide his rage. He informed Bradley that if the customs clearances were not processed by noon, Target Global would invoke the emergency breach clause of our contract. This clause held Apex Logistics Group liable for all lost inventory, port demurrage fees, and a penalty of $2.7 million per day for supply chain disruption. Furthermore, if the delay exceeded 48 hours, Target Global had the legal right to terminate the contract immediately without notice. Bradley tried to stammer an excuse, blaming a temporary database corruption, but the VP cut him off, telling him he had 3 hours to get the trucks moving or face a massive lawsuit that would bankrupt Apex. As soon as he hung up, Bradley desperately dialed my personal cell phone. I had turned my phone back on at exactly 9 a.m., sitting at my kitchen table with a hot cup of coffee. Within seconds, the screen lit up with 20 missed calls and 30 text messages from Bradley and Liam. I took a slow sip of my coffee, waited for the phone to ring again, and then answered it. "Howard Vance speaking," I said calmly. "Howard, where the hell have you been?" Bradley screamed into the receiver. "The port gate system is completely locked. We can't clear any containers. Liam says you put some kind of virus or lockout code in the server before you left. You need to get down here right now and fix this, or I will have the police arrest you for corporate sabotage." I let his yelling echo through the line for a moment before responding in a quiet, measured voice. "First of all, Bradley, I did not install a virus. I did not touch the servers. As the signed termination agreement states, I left the office at 10:15 on Friday morning. What you are experiencing is the automatic expiration of the software lease." "What lease? What are you talking about?" Bradley demanded. "The software lease between Vance Logistics Solutions LLC and Apex Logistics Group," I explained. Under the contract signed in 2011 by Richard Caldwell, Apex was granted a license to run Portgate for exactly $1 per year. The contract explicitly states that if my employment is terminated without cause, the license automatically expires at midnight on the day of termination. I am no longer an employee, so Apex no longer has the legal right to use my software or access my external licensing server. Citing 17 U.S.C. paragraph 106, your continued use of my proprietary customs APIs without an active license constitutes federal copyright infringement. There was a long, dead silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Bradley's heavy breathing. "We can just buy the software from you," Bradley said, his voice dropping its aggressive tone. "How much do you want? 10,000? 50,000? Name a price and write the code to unlock it." I chuckled softly. $50,000 wouldn't even cover the demurrage fees you've accumulated over the last 12 hours, Bradley. The price for a new licensing agreement is $5 million up front, plus a royalty fee, of $10 for every shipping container processed through Portgate going forward. Furthermore, the contract will be held under Vance Logistics Solutions LLC, and we will have the right to audit your servers monthly. $5 million. You're insane, Bradley roared. That's highway robbery. We will sue you. You can try, I replied, but by the time your lawyers file the paperwork, Target Global will have canceled their $45 million contract, and you will owe them millions in damages. The choice is yours. Let me know what the board decides. Wait, Howard, don't hang up, Bradley pleaded, his voice cracking. We can negotiate. What else do you want? There is one more non-negotiable condition, I said. For the safety of the systems, I cannot license my software to a company that employs incompetent management. You and Liam must be terminated by the board of directors for cause, effective immediately with zero severance. If you are still in that building by noon, the price goes up to $7 million. Before he could answer, I hung up the phone. I stood up, poured myself another cup of coffee, and sat down to read the morning news. The clock was ticking, and Bradley's corporate career was running out of time. At 10:15 a.m. on Monday morning, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed the personal mobile number of Richard Caldwell, our CEO. He was calling from the airport terminal in Tokyo, having cut his merger meeting short the moment he received the emergency alerts from Target Global and the Port Authority. Howard, Richard said, his voice sounding exhausted and aged. I just got off the phone with the board. They explained what is happening. I am so sorry. I should have never left Bradley in charge of daily operations without monitoring his decisions. Hello, Richard, I replied. I appreciate the apology. But Bradley decided to terminate my employment on Friday morning for insubordination when I took my approved vacation. He also signed the document stating that all my access to company systems was revoked. He's an idiot, Howard. Richard sighed. He didn't read the 2011 agreement. The legal department just pulled the original contract from the archives and confirmed that Vance Logistics Solutions LLC holds the exclusive copyright and that the lease expired the moment you were terminated. The board is in an absolute panic. Target Global is threatening a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, and our carrier license is on the verge of suspension. I know, I said. I gave Bradley my terms. A $5 million upfront licensing fee, $10 per container royalty, and the immediate termination of Bradley and Liam for cause. Richard did not hesitate. The board has already voted. We approve the terms. Our legal counsel has drafted the new software licensing agreement, and the wire transfer for $5 million is sitting in our outbound queue, waiting for your signature. Bradley and Liam have already been notified. Security is escorting them out of the building as we speak. Send the contract over to my personal email, Richard, I said. Once my lawyer reviews the terms and the wire transfer clears my account, I will reactivate the Portgate licensing server. Within 15 minutes, the document arrived in my inbox. The terms were exactly as I had specified. The $5 million licensing fee was structured as a non-refundable upfront payment for a 5-year term, and the $10 container fee was tied to our API dispatch calls, which would generate an estimated $2.3 million in passive royalty income for Vance Logistics Solutions LLC every year. My lawyer reviewed the document and gave me the green light. I signed the contract electronically at 11 a.m. 10 minutes later, my bank's mobile app sent a notification. A wire transfer of $5 million had cleared and was sitting in the business account of Vance Logistics Solutions LLC. I walked over to my desk, opened my personal laptop, and logged into my AWS admin console. I ran a single command line script to update the license registry for Apex Logistics Group from Exbergs to active. I then reauthorized the API security tokens for the Port Authority. At 11:15 a.m., the gray lockout screens at the Apex headquarters flashed back to life. The dispatchers let out a collective cheer as the live map of 400 trucks populated with green icons. The customs declaration queues immediately began processing at a rate of 50 containers per minute. The digital gate passes were issued, and the line of trucks blocking the highway began to roll into the terminal. By noon, the Target Global containers were cleared and moving. We had missed the deadline by less than 45 minutes. But because the system was now running at peak efficiency, the target VP agreed to waive the daily penalties, provided all their shipments were delivered by the end of the day. As the trucks moved, a very different scene was playing out at the Apex headquarters. Bradley Ward and Liam Ward were escorted through the lobby by two armed security guards. Bradley's face was red with embarrassment as he carried a cardboard box containing his designer desk accessories, while Liam looked at the floor, still unable to comprehend how his brief career as a logistics director had ended in a public humiliation. They were fired for cause, meaning they received no severance, no bonuses, and their corporate reputations in the logistics industry were completely ruined. I never returned to the Apex Logistics offices as an employee. I did not need to. I was now an independent software provider, earning more in passive royalties each month than my previous annual salary. 2 weeks later, Richard Caldwell returned from Tokyo and invited me to a quiet lunch. He looked relaxed, having officially handed over the COO duties to a veteran logistics manager who had been with the company for a decade. Richard raised his glass to me. "To the system, Howard. You built a machine that is stronger than any corporate executive." "No, Richard," I smiled, clinking my glass against his. "To the contract. The system only does what it is programmed to do, but the contract ensures that people have to respect the person who built it." Looking back at the entire ordeal, I realized that Bradley's arrogance was the best thing that ever happened to me. He thought he could use his corporate power to steal my life's work and hand it to his family. But in his rush to cut costs, he forgot the most basic rule of the modern supply chain. Never fire the person who holds the keys to the gate.